Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are shifting our days a little bit. We spend so much time in medicine looking for the explosion, the sudden heart attack, the traumatic injury, the acute infection that spikes a fever overnight.
The big dramatic event.
Exactly. But today, we are moving into the shadows. We are talking about what you could almost call the invisible assault.
It is a darker, quieter corner of pathology, isn't it? I mean, usually we're hunting for a singular villain, a specific bacteria or a virus.
Right.
But this is about the slow accumulation of damage, the stuff that happens over decades.
It is. We're talking about the air you are breathing right now as you listen to this, the water in your glass, the food on your plate, and even the invisible waves of energy passing through your body.
Yeah.
And the scary part isn't that these things kill you instantly, it's that they're cumulative. It's not one bad day, it's a lifetime of exposure writing a tragedy in your cells.
That's the perfect framing for it. In most of pathology, we're looking for that single smoking gun, a bacteria, a blocked artery, a specific genetic mutation. But today, we are looking at the interaction between the human organism and the world it inhabits. And frankly, the world is often trying to kill us, just very, very slowly.
To navigate this, we are pulling from the heavyweights. We have Robbins and Cochrane Pathologic Basis of Disease, specifically their chapter on environmental and nutritional diseases. This gives us that massive sort of clinico-pathological map.
Big picture.
A big picture, exactly. And we are pairing that with Underwood's pathology, specifically its chapter on environmental and nutritional factors, which is just fantastic for mechanistic clarity, the how and why things break down at a cellular level.
Our mission, then, is to synthesize these two. Robbins gives us the what and where, the whole landscape of environmental disease. And Underwood really drills down into the cellular machinery.
Right.
So we aren't just going to read a laundry list of poisons. We want to understand the rules of the game. How does the body try to adapt to smoke? What's the molecular price of alcohol? Why does a lack of protein make a child's belly swell up?
It's really a story about this constant tension between external stress and internal adaptation. We're going to cover the exogenous stressors first, so pollution, heavy metals, the chemical soup we all live in. Then we'll look at lifestyle choices, the vices we sort of volunteer for. Then we'll pivot to nutrition, both the lack of it in starvation and the massive excess of it in obesity.
And we'll finish up with a look at what happens when the internal chemistry itself is broken, those inborn errors of metabolism.
Before we get into the weeds, and we are going deep today, let's give you the quick version. If you take nothing else away from the next hour, what are the 4 pillars they need to understand?
Okay, 4 pillars. First, environmental disease is a game of cumulative exposure. It is rarely a single event. It's all about the dose and the duration. You don't get cancer from one cigarette, and you don't get lead poisoning from touching a pencil.
It's the slow drip.
It's the slow drip. The timeline matters more than anything. Second, and this is probably the most counterintuitive insight from Robbins, the body's attempt to defend itself can actually backfire.
How so?
We have these incredible systems to clean up toxins, but sometimes those very systems activate the toxin, turning a mild chemical into a cellular bomb.
So the cleanup crew accidentally sets the fire.
That's a perfect analogy. Third, nutritional disease is incredibly specific. Starvation isn't just running out of gas. The body breaks down specific compartments, muscle versus organ protein, depending on exactly what is missing from the diet.
That's a key distinction.
It is. And finally, number 4, we need to completely reframe obesity. It is not passive storage. Adipose tissue, or fat, is an active, screaming, inflammatory endocrine organ.
An endocrine organ. Wow. Okay, let's start with the air and the chemistry. Robbins opens with this term, xenobiotics. It sounds like something from the movie Alien, but it's actually quite mundane, isn't it?
It is. Xeno just means foreign. Biotic means life. So these are simply chemicals from the environment, air, water, soil, that have no business being inside a human body, yet they find their way in.
And there's a golden rule for all of them?
Yes. From Paracelsus, a Swiss physician from the 1500s, he famously said, "All substances are poisons. There is none which is not a poison. The right dosage differentiates a poison from a remedy."
So water is a poison if you drink 10 gallons in an hour, and arsenic can be a medication if you use a microdose.
Exactly. It is all about the dose.
Right.
But here's a biological problem. Once a xenobiotic gets into your body, say you inhale a solvent or absorb a pesticide through your skin, it wants to stay there. Most of these chemicals are lipophilic.
I love fat.
They love fat.
Yeah.
And our cell membranes are made of fat, right? The phospholipid bilayer.
Right.
So these toxins slide right through the membranes and just hide out in the cells. They don't dissolve in blood or urine well enough to be flushed out. If the body didn't have a way to handle them, they would just accumulate until we died.
Okay, so the body has a mission.
A critical mission.
Yeah.
Make it water-soluble. We have to turn these fat-loving molecules into water-loving molecules so we can pee them out.
So how does it do that? Where does this happen?
It's a two-step dance, and the liver is the dance floor. We call them phase 1 and phase 2 reactions.
Okay, phase 1.
Phase I is the modification phase. The body uses enzymes to perform hydrolysis, oxidation, or reduction. It's basically trying to stick a little chemical handle onto the toxin molecule so it has something to grab onto later.
And the star player here is a system I see mentioned in every pharmacology textbook, the cytochrome P450 system.
The CYPs, yep. These are heme-containing enzymes sitting in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum of liver cells. They're the absolute frontline workers. They take a drug or a toxin and they try to modify it.
But remember that twist we mentioned in the intro, the backfire.
This is exactly where it happens. The chemical reaction in phase I often produces a byproduct. Sometimes that byproduct is a reactive oxygen species, ROS, a free radical.
This is bad enough.
This is bad enough. But even worse, sometimes the CYP system converts a non-toxic chemical into a highly toxic metabolite. This is called bioactivation.
Robbins uses carbon tetrachloride as the prime example here. Can we walk through that? Because it really feels like the classic case of friendly fire.
It is the textbook definition. Carbon tetrachloride, CCl4, used to be common in dry cleaning fluids. On its own, it's actually not that reactive.
Okay.
But when you inhale it, it goes straight to the liver. The CYP enzymes in the liver see it and say, hey, let's metabolize this. They strip off an electron and they convert it into the CCl3 radical, the trichloromethyl free radical.
And that radical is the real weapon.
It's a molecular wrecking ball. It is incredibly unstable and immediately attacks the lipids in the cell membrane, a process called lipid peroxidation.
So just shredding the cell from the inside out?
Exactly. It destroys the endoplasmic reticulum.
Oh.
This means the liver cells can no longer synthesize proteins properly, which means they can't package up fat to ship it out of the cell.
So the fat gets stuck inside the liver cells.
Within 30 minutes of exposure, the liver starts filling up with fat. You see this rapid fatty change, or steatosis, which is then followed by cell death, and it's all because the liver tried to detoxify the chemical.
Wow.
If the CYP system hadn't touched it, the damage would have been minimal.
That is just wild. The attempt to fix the problem caused the pathology. So, okay, assuming we survive phase I without blowing up the liver, what happens next?
Phase 2. This is the conjugation step.
Right.
The body takes that modified metabolite from phase I and it glues a massive water-soluble molecule onto it.
Like what?
Usually glucuronic acid or sulfate or glutathione. Think of it like strapping a buoyant life jacket onto a rock.
I like that.
Now, the chemical is water-soluble. It can dissolve in the blood. It gets to the kidneys, and it's excreted in the urine. Problem solved.
Now, does everyone have the same capacity for this? I feel like I know people who can be exposed to fumes or drink coffee all day and be fine, while others are super sensitive to everything.
Not at all, and that's a critical point for clinical medicine. There are massive genetic polymorphisms in these enzymes. You might have a supercharger version of a CYP enzyme, or you might have a sluggish version.
So your genes determine how you handle toxins.
Absolutely. It explains why some people are fast metabolizers of prescription drugs and others are slow. Your response to a standard dose of a medication could be completely different based on your specific CYP genetics.
And lifestyle plays a role too, right? I've heard you can sort of train these enzymes.
You can induce them. That's the correct term. If you smoke or drink alcohol chronically, your liver thinks, I'm under constant attack. I need more workers on the assembly line. So it ramps up the production of CYP enzymes and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum where they live.
Which sounds like a good thing.
It is. In a way, it means you metabolize things faster. That's why tolerance develops. But it also means you might produce those toxic free radicals faster when you're exposed to something new. It changes your entire baseline for how you handle everything else, including medications you might need later.
It's a system in constant flux. Let's move from the liver out to the lungs, air pollution. Robbins makes a point that this is a significant cause of morbidity, not just some annoyance in big cities.
Oh, it's a massive global health burden. We often think of smog as just one thing, but we need to break it down. You have the gases like ozone, and then you have the particles.
Let's start with ozone. Now,
Yeah.
this isn't the good ozone layer protecting us from the sun, right? This is ground-level ozone.
Exactly right. Ground-level ozone is formed when sunlight hits nitrogen oxides from things like car exhaust. And while ozone is a gas, biologically, it acts as a free radical generator.
So when you breathe it in.
When you inhale it, it reacts with the lining of your respiratory tract. It directly injures the epithelial cells and causes a huge amount of inflammation.
So for someone who already has asthma or, say, emphysema, this is like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Precisely. It makes the lungs hyperreactive and triggers exacerbations.
Yeah.
But I would argue the more insidious threat is the particulate matter, or PM. And with particles, size is everything.
Okay. Robbins emphasizes particles less than 10 micrometers PM10 or even smaller, PM2.5. Why is that size the deciding factor?
It's simple physics, really.
Mm-hmm.
Big particles like dust or pollen, they get trapped in your nose or your throat mucus. You sneeze them out or you swallow them. The mucociliary escalator, those little hairs in your airways, handles them.
But the small ones?
But particles smaller than 10 micrometers are so small and aerodynamic, they just bypass all those defenses. They travel all the way down into the deepest part of the lung, the alveolar sacs, where gas exchange happens.
And once they're down there, they don't really come out, do they?
They get stuck. They get phagocytosed, eaten by alveolar macrophages. But the macrophages can't really digest them, so they just sit there, inciting this low-grade chronic inflammation.
And that inflammation doesn't just stay in the lung.
That's the crucial point. Inflammatory mediators spill out of the lungs and into the blood. This systemic inflammation is why air pollution is so strongly linked to heart attacks, strokes, and systemic atherosclerosis. It's a lung problem that becomes a whole body problem.
There's one specific pollutant that Robbins calls the silent killer, carbon monoxide. This one is particularly terrifying because you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it.
Pionne. It is the classic cause of accidental death in house fires or from faulty furnaces. The pathology here is fascinating because it's purely a battle for a parking spot.
A parking spot on the hemoglobin molecule in our red blood cells.
Correct. Hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen. It has 4 binding sites. Carbon monoxide looks at those sites and grabs them with an affinity that is 200 times higher than oxygen's affinity.
200 times, so oxygen doesn't even stand a chance.
It's a bully. It just kicks oxygen out of its seat and then refuses to let go. So you might be breathing normally, your lungs are working fine, your heart is pumping, but your blood is carrying 0 oxygen to your brain and your other organs. It is systemic asphyxiation.
And there's a really paradoxical finding on the physical exam, right? You'd expect someone who is suffocating to look blue or cyanotic.
That's the classic gotcha question on exams. Cyanosis happens when you have deoxygenated hemoglobin, which is a bluish color. But hemoglobin bound to carbon monoxide, carboxyhemoglobin, is a bright cherry red color.
So the victims don't look blue.
They look flushed. They have a healthy-looking cherry red color to their skin and mucous membranes, even post-mortem. It's a very grim masquerade of health.
We also have to worry about the air inside our homes. Robbins calls out two in particular, radon and formaldehyde.
Radon is the real sleeper threat.
Yeah.
It's a radioactive gas that comes from the natural decay of uranium in the soil. It can seep up through a house's foundation and accumulate in basements.
And you'd never know it was there.
Never. You can't smell it. But it's the second leading cause of lung cancer right after smoking. It's a major risk, especially for people who've never smoked.
And formaldehyde, that just sounds like a mortuary.
Well, it's used in all sorts of building materials. Pressed wood, cabinetry, insulation. In new, tightly sealed homes, it can off-gas into the indoor air. There's a potent irritant for the eyes and throat, and it's a known carcinogen. It's a major component of what we call sick building syndrome.
It really reinforces that idea of the invisible salt. You're sitting in your basement thinking you're safe, but you're surrounded by invisible gas and off-gassing cabinets.
Yeah.
Let's shift to something a bit heavier, literally. Heavy metals.
The persistent poisons.
Uh-huh.
The theme with metals is a bit different from the gases. Metals don't just react and then they're gone, they stick around. And their main trait is that they mimic essential elements in our body.
Let's start with the big one, lead. Robbins goes into great detail here because it's been such a public health disaster for centuries. Why is lead so toxic?
Lead is a master mimic. Its first major mechanism is that it binds to sulfhydryl groups in proteins, which just wrecks the function of countless enzymes. But its most devious trick is that it interferes with calcium metabolism. It basically pretends to be calcium.
And since the body uses calcium for basically everything, bones, nerves, muscles, lead gets a free pass to go everywhere.
Exactly. And in children, this is devastating because their bones are actively growing. The lead gets incorporated right into the bone matrix instead of calcium. On an X-ray, you can actually see these lead lines, these super dense white lines in the epiphysis, the growth plates of the wrist and knee.
So the skeleton becomes a storage depot for poison.
It becomes a fossil record of exposure. That lead can stay there for decades and then be leached out later in life, for example, during pregnancy or osteoporosis.
But it doesn't just stay in the bone, it attacks the blood too.
Yes, it causes a very specific type of anemia. Lead inhibits two key enzymes in the heme synthesis pathway. The names are a mouthful, but they are delta-amylolevulinic acid dehydratase and furochelatase.
Okay, so what's the consequence of blocking those?
To put it simply, you can't put iron into the heme ring. If you can't make hemoglobin. The result is a microcytic, hypochromic anemia, small, pale red blood cells.
But there's a giveaway on the blood smear.
The absolute giveaway is something called basophilic stippling.
Describe what that looks like.
If you look at a blood smear under a microscope, the red blood cells have these tiny, coarse blue dots scattered inside them. Those dots are aggregates of RNA that the cell couldn't properly clear because lead broke the machinery for RNA degradation. It's a classic board exam finding.
And the nervous system. I know the story of lead paint chips in kids is the classic danger scenario.
The neurotoxicity is the real tragedy of lead. In children, lead disrupts the developing blood-brain barrier. It causes brain edema, it measurably lowers IQ, and it causes learning disabilities and behavioral problems that are often irreversible.
And in adults.
In adults, the symptoms are different. It tends to attack the peripheral nerves, specifically the motor nerves that control muscles.
Robbins mentions wrist drop and foot drop.
Yes, it causes demyelination of the nerves that control extension of the hand and foot, so the patient literally cannot lift their hand up in the wrist. It just hangs there, limp. Same with the foot.
Moving from lead to mercury. The phrase that always comes to mind for me is mad as a hatter.
Which is historically accurate. In the 18th and 19th centuries, hatters used mercury nitrate to cure felt for hats. They were constantly inhaling the mercury fumes, which caused severe neurotoxicity, tremors, emotional instability, psychosis, hence the Mad Hatter.
But today, our main exposure isn't from curing felt, it's from eating sushi.
Right. The modern threat is organic mercury, specifically methyl mercury. And this brings us to the concept of bioaccumulation.
Okay, explain that.
Mercury from industrial waste settles in the water of oceans and lakes. Bacteria in the sediment convert it into methylmercury. Then plankton absorb the methylmercury. Small fish eat the plankton. Then bigger fish eat the small fish.
So it concentrates up the food chain.
It concentrates at every single step. So by the time you eat a big predatory fish like a tuna, a swordfish, or a shark, the mercury is concentrated 1,000,000-fold or more from the original level in the water.
And methylmercury is fiercely neurotoxic.
Incredibly so. The most harrowing example Robbins cites is Minamata disease, which happened in Japan in the 1950s. A chemical factory dumped tons of mercury into Minamata Bay. The local population, who lived on fish from the bay, suffered an epidemic of cerebral palsy, deafness, and blindness.
And the fetus was the most vulnerable target.
Tragically, yes. The mothers themselves often had only mild symptoms, but their infants were born with severe, devastating brain damage. The developing brain is like a sponge for methylmercury. It's a potent teratogen.
Next on the list of persistent poisons is arsenic, the poison of kings.
The favorite of the Borgias, right? It's tasteless and odorless, which made it the perfect murder weapon for centuries. But chemically, it's just brutal. Its main mechanism is that it interferes with mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation.
It basically unplugs the cell's power plant.
It shuts down ATP production completely. If the dose is high enough, you die from shock and GI collapse very quickly. But chronic, low-level exposure like from arsenic-contaminated well water, which is a huge problem in places like Bangladesh and parts of India, it leaves a signature on the skin.
And what does that look like?
You get a strange pattern of hyperpigmentation dark spots mixed with hypopigmentation. And you get hyperkeratosis.
Yeah.
The skin on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet becomes incredibly thick, rough, and scaly. Robbins also notes that chronic arsenic is a potent carcinogen, leading to cancers of the lung, bladder, and skin, often decades after the exposure ends.
Okay, last one for the metals. Cadmium. This feels more modern, more industrial.
It is. Think batteries, fertilizers, mining operations. Cadmium is primarily toxic to the kidneys and the lungs. But the disease it causes has perhaps the most descriptive name in all of pathology. Itai disease.
Which translates to...
Ouch, ouch, disease.
Oh.
Yes. It happened in postmenopausal women in Japan who were living near a mine that dumped cadmium into the river water they used to irrigate their rice fields. Cadmium causes severe damage to the proximal renal tubules in the kidney, which means you can no longer reabsorb calcium. You just pee out all your calcium.
So the bones just dissolve.
The bones become incredibly soft and brittle, a combination of osteomalacia and osteoporosis. The women would suffer from debilitating bone pain and would fracture bones just from walking or even coughing. Every movement was agony, hence, ouch, ouch disease.
That is just heartbreaking. It really brings home the direct connection between an industrial pollutant and human suffering.
Absolutely.
Now let's pivot. Sometimes the environment isn't something forced on us, it's something we choose. We're entering the lifestyle section of our talk.
Tobacco and alcohol, the two great voluntary toxins.
Let's be brief on tobacco, because I think everyone knows it's bad, but the sheer scale of the toxicity is worth repeating.
It is the single most preventable cause of human death, period. Full stop. And tobacco smoke isn't just smoke. It's a chemical cocktail of over 7,000 compounds.
A cocktail, that's a good way to put it.
You've got the direct carcinogens, things like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and nitrosamines. You have irritants like formaldehyde and nitrogen oxides. You have carbon monoxide, which we already talked about. And of course, nicotine, the addictive agent.
We all know it causes lung cancer.
Yes, but the scope is so much wider and it's systemic. It paralyzes the cilia in the lungs, which leads to accumulation of mucus and bacteria, that's chronic bronchitis. It directly destroys the alveolar walls, that's emphysema. It hardens the arteries, that's atherosclerosis, leading to heart attacks and strokes. Robbins is very clear on this. The risk is directly dose-dependent. There is no such thing as a safe cigarette.
Now let's do a real deep dive into alcohol. Everyone knows alcohol affects the liver, but the chemistry of why it does what it does is fascinating. Robbins breaks down the metabolism into 3 distinct pathways.
This is absolutely crucial to understand. When you drink ethanol, your body treats it as both a priority fuel and a potent toxin. The main highway for its breakdown is an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, or EDH, which is in the cytosol of the liver cells.
Okay, so that's route number 1, the main route.
That's the main route. EDH converts ethanol into a substance called acetaldehyde. In the process of doing this, it converts a molecule called NAD+ into NADH.
Pause there for a second. Why does this ratio, the NAD+ to NADH ratio, why does that matter so much?
This is the key aha moment for understanding alcoholic liver disease. The liver needs NAD+ to burn fat, a process called fatty acid oxidation. It's a necessary cofactor. But alcohol metabolism hogs all the available NAD+ and converts it into NADH. So the liver effectively runs out of the fuel it needs to burn fat.
So the liver stops burning fat for energy.
It stops burning it. And because of the high NADH, it actually starts synthesizing more of it. This is the direct biochemical reason for steatosis, or fatty liver. It's not just that alcohol has calories, it's that alcohol fundamentally breaks the liver's metabolic switch, forcing it to hoard fat.
That explains why even moderate but regular drinkers can get a fatty liver so quickly. What about the other pathways?
Right, so if you drink a lot or drink chronically, the ADH system gets completely overwhelmed. The body then has to bring in the backup generator, which is the microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, or MeOS, specifically an enzyme called CYP2E1 in the endoplasmic reticulum.
Ah, the CYP system again?
The very same one. And remember, this system is inducible. The more you drink over time, the more CYP2E1 your liver builds. This explains the phenomenon of tolerance. An alcoholic can drink a bottle of vodka and stay standing because their CYP system is massive and chews through the alcohol quickly.
But there's a downside to using this pathway.
A huge downside. As we learned, CYPs produce free radicals as a byproduct. So this pathway causes much more oxidative stress and direct liver damage than the primary ADH pathway.
And the product of both of these pathways is acetaldehyde.
And acetaldehyde is nasty stuff. It's actually more toxic than alcohol itself. It causes DNA damage, it promotes inflammation, and it's responsible for the flushing, nausea, and tachycardia associated with drinking.
And normally, another enzyme gets rid of it.
Yes, a second enzyme called acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, or ALDH, is supposed to quickly turn it into harmless acetate, which is basically vinegar.
But this is where genetics comes in again, in a big way.
In a huge way.
Yeah.
About 50% of people of East Asian descent have a genetic mutation in the ALDH2 gene. Their version of the enzyme is extremely slow. So when they drink even a small amount of alcohol, acetaldehyde builds up immediately to toxic levels.
And that causes the Asian flush.
Exactly. They get the characteristic facial flushing, a rapid heart rate, and intense nausea. It's essentially nature's version of the drug and abuse. It's actually protective against alcoholism because the act of drinking becomes physically unpleasant very, very quickly,
Let's trace the pathology in the liver. We start with fatty liver.
which is reversible. If you stop drinking, the fat will mobilize and the liver can recover. But if you continue heavy drinking, the inflammation kicks in. This is alcoholic hepatitis.
What's happening there?
The liver cells are swollen and dying. Neutrophils swarm into the liver to try and clean up the mess. And under the microscope, you might see these characteristic things called Mallory-Dank bodies inside the hepatocytes. They're basically tangled clumps of damaged cytoskeleton.
And the end stage of this process.
Cirrhosis. The liver essentially turns into scar tissue. It becomes hard, shrunken, and nodular. Blood can't flow through it properly, leading to portal hypertension. The liver can't do its job of cleaning the blood, which can lead to hepatic coma. And of course, it dramatically increases the risk for hepatocellular carcinoma.
And it's not just the liver. Robbins lists a horror show of other effects throughout the body.
Oh, absolutely. The CNS is hit very hard. Alcoholics are often malnourished, which leads to thiamine or vitamin B1 deficiency. This causes a devastating condition called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome.
That's the one with the memory issues, right?
It has two parts. Wernicke's encephalopathy is the acute phase. You see confusion, ataxia, which is a wobbly walk, and ophthalmoplegia, which is paralysis of the eye muscles. If that's not treated with thiamine urgently, it can progress to Korsakoff syndrome, which is a chronic, permanent memory loss. Patients develop anterograde amnesia, and they confabulate.
They make up stories.
They make up detailed, plausible stories to fill in the gaps in their memory, but they aren't lying. They genuinely believe what they're saying. It's tragic.
And fetal alcohol syndrome.
The most tragic consequence of all. Alcohol crosses the placenta freely and acts as a teratogen. It causes microcephaly, or a small head, growth retardation, and characteristic facial abnormalities. It is the leading cause of preventable intellectual disability in the Western world.
Robbins also touches on the benefit myth. For a long time, we heard that a glass of red wine is good for the heart.
The text is very careful here. It acknowledges that past studies showed moderate intake raises HDL, the good cholesterol. However, the data is shifting. More recent, larger studies suggest that the carcinogenic risk, especially for breast cancer in women and esophageal cancer, starts to climb even with very moderate drinking. The consensus is really shifting away from it's healthy to it's a risk that you manage. No amount is completely safe.
So pick your poison carefully. Let's move to section 4, physical forces, specifically radiation.
Yes, this is about energy itself as a source of injury. We're talking about ionizing radiation X-rays, gamma rays, alpha, and beta particles. The definition is any energy that's sufficient to knock electrons out of atoms. It turns stable atoms into charged reactive ions.
So how does that actually hurt the cell? Is it like a tiny bullet hitting the DNA?
Sometimes, yes. That's the direct effect. A gamma ray can physically hit the DNA molecule and cause a break. But Robbins points out that the indirect effect is actually much more common.
Okay, what's that?
Well, remember, our cells are mostly water, about 70% water.
Right.
When radiation hits a water molecule inside your cell, it causes radiolysis. It splits the H2O and creates hydroxyl-free radicals. These radicals are then the bullets that go on to damage the DNA, proteins, and lipids.
That is fascinating. It turns our own water against us.
Precisely. And the vulnerability of any given tissue depends on a classic rule, the law of Burgoni and Trivandau. Tissues that are rapidly dividing are the most sensitive to radiation.
Why is that?
Because DNA damage is most catastrophic when a cell is trying to replicate its DNA and then divide, and error gets locked in and amplified.
So the tissues with high turnover take the hit first.
Exactly. The bone marrow, the lining of the gut, the skin, the gonads, they're all highly radiosensitive. In contrast, brain cells and heart muscle cells, which don't divide much in adults, are relatively radioresistant.
This explains the sequence of total body irradiation syndromes that Robbins describes.
It's a dose ladder. At lower but still lethal doses, say 2 to 10 sieverts, you get the hematopoietic syndrome. The radiation wipes out the bone marrow stem cells.
So you stop making blood cells.
Exactly. You stop making white blood cells and platelets. You might feel fine for a latent period of a week or two, but then you die from overwhelming infection or uncontrollable bleeding.
And if you step up the dose,
At 10 to 20 sieverts, you get the gastrointestinal syndrome. Now, the radiation is intense enough to kill the stem cells in the crypts of the gut lining. The entire mucosal lining slows off.
oh, that's awful.
It is. You get massive bloody diarrhea, severe dehydration, and then sepsis because all the bacteria in your gut can now enter your bloodstream freely. Death happens in days.
And at the very highest dose.
Over 50 sieverts. That's the CNS syndrome. The radiation is so intense it directly damages the blood vessels in the brain, causing massive cerebral edema. You get convulsions, coma, and death within hours. There's no latent period.
And even if you survive the acute phase of a lower dose, there are always late effects to worry about.
Always. The two big ones are fibrosis, which is basically scarring of the tissues, and carcinogenesis. The DNA damage acts as a seed. A double-strand break that is repaired incorrectly can lead to a mutation that, decades later, blossoms into a leukemia, or a thyroid cancer, or a sarcoma.
Which brings us right back to that theme of latency. The environment you live in today is writing the pathology of your future.
It absolutely is.
Let's shift gears completely. From poisons and energy to the lack of sustenance. Section 5, nutritional deficiencies.
We need to talk about severe acute malnutrition. Robbins and Underwood both do a beautiful job of describing the two ends of this spectrum, marasmus and kwashiorkor. These are often confused, so let's distinguish them very clearly.
Marasmus first. This is what we would typically think of as simple starvation, right?
Correct. Marasmus is a total calorie deficiency. The child is missing protein, carbs, and fats. It is a balanced starvation, if you can call it that.
And how does the body respond to that?
That is the key word, adaptation. It's an adaptive response. The body says, okay, no food is coming in. My number one priority is to save the brain. It lowers insulin and it raises cortisol. This signals the body to break down the somatic protein compartment.
And that is?
That's your skeletal muscle. It cannibalizes its own muscles for amino acids, which the liver then uses to make glucose to keep the brain alive. It also burns up every last bit of subcutaneous fat.
So the child looks extremely emaciated.
Terribly emaciated. They have broomstick extremities, wrinkled skin, and their head looks too large for their tiny body. But, and this is the critical points here, albumin levels are usually normal or only slightly reduced.
Why is that?
Because the liver is still working. The visceral protein compartment is being preserved at the expense of the muscles. The body is, in a grim way, successfully adapting to a terrible situation.
Now, contrast that with kwashiorkor.
Kwashiorkor is a maladaptive response. It occurs when protein deprivation is severe, but the child is still getting some calories, usually because they've been weaned from breast milk onto a pure carbohydrate diet like rice water or cassava gruel.
The name itself tells a story, doesn't it?
It does. It's from the Gala language in Ghana,
Yeah.
and it's often translated as the disease of the displaced child, the older child who gets displaced from the mother's breast by a new baby.
So why is the carbohydrate intake the central problem here?
Because the carbs trigger an insulin response. Insulin tells the body, don't break down muscle. So the somatic muscle compartment is actually spared. But because there is no dietary protein coming in, the liver runs out of the amino acids it needs to make its own proteins. The visceral protein compartment fails.
And the main protein the liver makes is albumin.
Exactly. The liver stops making albumin. And Underwood explains beautifully why this leads to the classic look of kwashiorkor.
Which is the edema.
It's the edema. Albumin acts like a sponge in your blood, holding water inside the blood vessels through oncotic pressure. When your albumin levels plummet, that water leaks out into the tissues. So you get a swollen belly from ascites and swollen limbs and face. It's a deceptive look. It masks the severe underlying muscle wasting.
And they have other characteristic signs, like that flaky paint skin.
Yes, areas of hyperpigmented skin that peel off, and a fatty liver. For the same reason as in alcoholics, the liver can't make the apoproteins needed to package up fat and export it, so the fat gets stuck there. It's a tragic, complex metabolic failure driven by that protein-calorie mismatch.
From macronutrients to micronutrients, let's talk vitamins. These are failures of specific molecular pathways.
Robbins covers many, but let's hit the big three. Vitamin A.
Retinol.
Yes. It's crucial for two things: vision and the maintenance of specialized epithelia. Deficiency leads to night blindness because you can't make rhodopsin, the pigment in your retinal rods.
But it's more dangerous than just night blindness.
Oh, much more. Your mucus-secreting membranes dry out. The conjunctiva of the eye gets dry, a condition called xerophthalmia, which can lead to corneal ulcers, scarring, and permanent blindness. And the lining of your lungs and trachea undergoes squamous metaplasia.
It turns into skin-like cells.
It turns into dry, skin-like cells instead of mucus-producing cells. This cripples your defenses against infection, so these children are incredibly prone to pneumonia.
Next up, vitamin C, the pirate's disease. Scurvy.
Ascorbic acid, its job is incredibly specific. Hydroxylation. It's a necessary cofactor for enzymes that add an OH group to proline and lysine amino acids during the synthesis of collagen.
Why is that hydroxylation step so important?
That hydroxylation allows the individual collagen strands to cross-link and form a stable triple helix. It's the glue that holds the collagen molecule together. Without vitamin C, your collagen is unstable. It literally falls apart at body temperature.
Which explains the symptoms.
Perfectly. Your gums bleed, and your teeth loosen because the collagen in the periodontal ligaments fails. You get bleeding into the skin petechiae because your blood vessel walls are weak. And in a horrifying twist, old healed wounds can actually reopen as the scar tissue disintegrates. You lose structural integrity.
That is just terrifying old scars opening up. And finally, vitamin D.
The bone builder. It's essential for absorbing calcium from the gut and mineralizing bone. In kids, a deficiency causes rickets. The bone matrix, the osteoid, gets laid down but doesn't harden with calcium. It stays soft.
So when the child starts to walk,
The long bones of the legs can't support the body's weight and they bow outwards. In adults, who are no longer growing, it's called osteomalacia, soft bones that are prone to fracture.
okay, we've covered the lack of food. Now let's flip the coin and talk about the opposite. Section 6, nutritional excess, obesity.
This is where the synthesis in Robbins is so important for modern medicine. We used to think of fat as just inert storage, like a backpack of energy you carry around. Robbins reframes this entirely. Adipose tissue is an endocrine organ. It actively talks to the brain and the rest of the body.
So it's not just dead weight, it's an active player.
A very active, very powerful player. Obesity is fundamentally a disorder of energy regulation. You have this complex neurohormonal control system. The gas pedal for hunger is a hormone called ghrelin, which comes from the stomach. The brake is a hormone called leptin, which comes from fat cells.
Let's talk about leptin. It's supposed to be the satiety signal telling the brain we are full.
Exactly. Leptin is the body's fuel gauge. When fat stores are high, leptin levels in the blood are high, and that should signal the hypothalamus to stop eating and increase energy expenditure. But in the vast majority of obese individuals, we see a state of leptin resistance. The fuel gauge is reading full, but the brain isn't listening to the signal. It's like the wire from the fuel tank to the dashboard is cut. So the person continues to feel hungry, and their body continues to conserve energy despite having massive excess energy stores.
And there's another player in the system, adiponectin.
Adiponectin is like the guardian angel molecule produced by fat cells. It increases insulin sensitivity and promotes the burning of fatty acids. It keeps you metabolically healthy. But tragically, in obesity, as fat cells get bigger and more inflamed, adiponectin levels drop. So you lose your guardian angel just when you need it most.
Robbins also makes a strong link between obesity and cancer. That was surprising to me when I first learned it.
Well, it's a terrifyingly strong link. Obesity increases circulating levels of insulin and IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor, both of which are potent mitogens. They tell cells to divide. That's one mechanism. Plus, fat tissue contains an enzyme called aromatase.
And that's the enzyme that makes estrogen.
Yes. It converts androgens into estrogens. So obese postmenopausal women, for example, have much higher estrogen levels than their lean counterparts. And this excess estrogen drives the growth of estrogen-dependent cancers, like breast and endometrial cancer.
And on top of all that, it's a state of chronic inflammation.
Chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation. The enlarged stressed fat cells release inflammatory cytokines like TNF and interleukin-1 into the bloodstream. This inflammation is a major driver of insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes, and is the core of the metabolic syndrome, that cluster of central obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and hyperglycemia. It's a vicious cycle where the fat tissue actively attacks the metabolic health of its host.
Finally, let's synthesize Underwood with a quick look at Section 7, internal metabolic errors. This is when the external environment is fine, but the internal genetic code is broken.
These are the inborn errors of metabolism. Underwood categorizes them beautifully. Sometimes the problem is an accumulation of a toxic substrate. Take phenylketonuria, PKU. A single missing enzyme, phenylalanine hydroxylase, means you can't process the amino acid phenylalanine. It builds up in the blood and causes severe, irreversible brain damage, if not caught at birth.
Or it can be more of a plumbing problem, like in cystic fibrosis.
Exactly. CF is a channelopathy. The genetic defect is in a chloride transporter called CFTR. If you can't move chloride ions properly across cell membranes, you can't hydrate mucus. You get this thick, sticky, tenacious mucus that clogs the lungs and the ducts of the pancreas.
And Wilson's disease, that's another accumulation problem.
Yes, but with a metal. It's a copper accumulation problem. The liver has a genetic defect where it can't excrete copper into the bile. So copper builds up in the liver, causing cirrhosis, and eventually it spills out into the blood and deposits in the brain, causing psychiatric symptoms and tremors, and in the eye. Yes, the classic sign is the Kaiser-Fleischer rings, these golden brown copper deposits in the cornea of the eye. You can see them on a slit lamp exam.
And we have to mention gout, which is distinct from those genetic diseases.
Gout is an acquired metabolic disorder of uric acid. Uric acid is the waste product of purine breakdown. If you produce too much or can't excrete enough, it can precipitate into sharp, needle-like monosodium urate crystals in your joints, classically the big toe.
And why does it hurt so much? It's famous for being agonizing.
Underwood explains the mechanics perfectly. Neutrophils, your inflammatory white blood cells, rush to the joint and try to eat these crystals. But the crystals are like sharp, indigestible needles. They physically puncture the lysosome inside the neutrophil.
So the cell's own digestive sac bursts.
It bursts, releasing all those acidic, destructive lysosomal enzymes right into the joint space. It's essentially a suicide explosion of the neutrophil that triggers an intense, agonizing inflammatory response.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground. From the ozone in the air to the lead in the bones, the whiskey in the liver, and the fat cells sending out inflammatory signals to the brain. What's the unifying theme here? What does this all mean?
If we synthesize all of this, the recurring theme is thresholds and adaptation. Our bodies are incredibly resilient. The liver induces enzymes to handle alcohol. The muscles sacrifice themselves to save the brain in starvation. We are constantly trying to adapt.
But there's always a limit.
Exactly. Disease occurs when the dose of the stressor, whether it's a chemical toxin, a physical force like radiation, or even just excess calories, exceeds the body's adaptive capacity. Whether it's lead-mimicking calcium in bone or excess energy causing fat cells to become inflammatory, pathology is essentially a record of the body's failed negotiation with its environment.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for today.
I want you to think about the latency. We talked about how a single DNA break from radiation or a deposit of lead in a child's bone can sit there, silent, for decades. It makes you realize that health isn't just about how you feel today. The environment you are living in right now, the air you breathe, the food you eat, the stress you're under, is writing the pathology of your future self 20, 30, even 40 years down the line. We tend to view health as a state, but it is really a timeline.
That is a heavy but very important thought to leave on. As always, this deep dive is just a map. Robbins and Underwood are the territory.
I highly recommend you open Robbins to look at the diagrams on alcohol metabolism. They clarify the chemistry beautifully. And then look at Underwood for the diagrams showing the mechanics of edema in kwashiorkor and the crystals in gout. Reading the text is essential to really locking this in.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Stay curious.